Please be seated. Now, in a few moments, I'm going to ask the lovely Tom, who is controlling the PowerPoint, to move the slide along. Not just yet, but I should be asking at a certain dramatic point in the sermon. They've been cracking on there at dramatic points in the sermon. The sermon is about an Anglo-Saxon queen called Sexburger. Indeed, yes, quite. Today is the feast day of Saint Sexburger. Now, why do these bizarre and outmoded old dears from ages back have any relevance to us? Well, you know, we have not exactly evolved over the last 2,000 years. The experience and the hopes and the fears of people 1,500 years ago are pretty much the same as they are now. And people who were mighty in the faith, people who experienced transformative interventions of the Holy Spirit, because that's what they were, just because they were old Catholic ladies, or they were Orthodox, or they were something which now to us seems archaic, it doesn't change the fact that it was the Holy Spirit moving in them. It was an experience-driven faith that they had. It wasn't an intellectual alone faith. I've told you before, there are records of monks who, when they were praying, would be so overcome with the Holy Spirit that they would levitate. They would rise up off the floor, much to the irritation of their fellow monks who felt that they were stealing the limelight. And in fact, there is a letter that survives that was written to the Vatican complaining about this one particular monk who would insist on floating up to the ceiling every time the Mass was said. Seriously! The letter exists. The guy was later made a saint. But, you know, I mean, if that's not Pentecostal, I don't know what is. I mean, my goodness, falling in the Spirit is one thing. Floating up to the apex of the church is quite another. And then there are all those extraordinary experiences, like the stigmata appearing, the signs of Christ appearing on people of great holiness. And what does holiness mean? Truthfulness, that's what it means. Truthfulness. It means that the veil of falsehood between us and God has become very thin in these people. And that they can see God and God can see them. And that there is a continual conversation that goes on in its full richness, not mediated by the nonsense that fills most of our head, that fills my head. So I am not going to apologize for preaching about Saint Sexburger and the Vision Glorious. The Vision Glorious is a term that was coined to characterize the great revival that happened in the Church of England when it was nearly dead in the mid-19th century. And it was called the Oxford Movement, or the Anglo-Catholic Revival, and I am a product of it. But they called it the Vision Glorious because ordinary people who had been going about their business, who had been doing what was expected of them, who had been reading their sermons out of a book, it's called the Book of Homilies, so that you didn't say anything which was too dodgy or dangerous, so they were reading it out of a book. They were frequently paying a clerk to read it out of the book because they were so bored with the whole affair. They had double-decker pulpits. They'd snooze at the top, whilst the clerk sat at the bottom reading from the Book of Homilies. Everyone had paid for their pews. They were box pews, so that you couldn't see what was going on inside. People would catch up on their reading, or have a nap, or make love to their wives, or whoever it was that they had in there. The religion of the state was moribund. It was near death.
Yes.
And then, the Vision Glorious. Now, by your works you shall know them. And what happened was that within the space of 30 years, everything had changed. Everything had changed. There were extraordinary, ornate churches being built on every street corner in parts of the great metropolises where nobody had cared about beforehand because it was just full of the poor. And these slum priests, often from wealthy backgrounds, went in to work in these parishes and were the great drivers of change when it came to social reform, when it came to decent housing, when it came to covering the open sewers that there were in East London at that time, when it came to the terrible social problems of children being abandoned in the streets. It was the clergy that was at the forefront of that. Now, if we think of social justice, the church seems to be invariably 30 years behind the times. Yeah. Then the church led the charge for grace and justice, because it had seen the vision glorious. It wasn't just going through the motions. It wasn't just reading the expected sermons out of the book. And of course it upset a lot of people. There were riots. Do you know there's such a thing called the vestment riots of Exeter that were had in the 1880s, because the cathedral staff in Exeter Cathedral started wearing vestments. Those richly embroidered chasubles, which had last been seen in the Church of England at the time of the Reformation. But they started putting them on as an outward sign of an inward grace. As a sign of the vision glorious, they made things beautiful, because they believed in giving their best to God. Not any old thing to God, but their best. So Dorcas guilds jumped up in churches all over the country, and the Dorcas guilds did elaborate embroidery and beautified the inside of the churches, and the ordinary people of the parish would buy parish bricks to be able to build a church. It became the thing they could never have. It was a thing of beauty and transcendence, which they weren't going to have in their squalid lives, in their lives of poverty. So they made it communally, and they went there on a Sunday to worship the God of beauty and transcendence. Well, St. Sexburger was one of the 5 holy sisters, all of which had nearly impronounceable names. And she was a daughter of King Anna of East Anglia. Now in those days, in Anglo-Saxon England, before the Norman Conquest, if you know your, God knows, I don't know my history in that area, but the place was divided into lots of fiddly little kingdoms. And East Anglia was one of the more important ones. East Anglia comes from the East Angles, and the Angles came from, well, the continent, Denmark, sort of northern Germany, that sort of area. So she was nobly born, and you could tell that she was nobly born because people in her family had the prefix Ethel. So like Ethelbert. Ethelbert means the nobly born Bert. It makes it sound a lot better really when you say it like that. But Sexburger then married the King of Kent. She didn't want to get married, but it was a dynastic marriage. It was important that those 2 kingdoms came close together for protection and everything else. When the King of Kent died, her son was too young to ascend to the throne, so she became regent. She ruled the double nations. Now, she'd already founded a monastery at a place called Minster in Sheppey, which is the middle of nowhere, and always was the middle of nowhere. It is a God-forsaken place. It's on the Isle of Sheppey in the Thames Estuary. There's an enormous power station there now. But there was this monastery, Minster in Sheppey, where people went to escape, not from people, because they lived in community there. And they did all the really difficult things, living with people close in, day out. But they fled society. They didn't flee people. She'd already done that. She'd sponsored these monasteries, but she still had duties. So she was regent whilst her son was growing up. And as soon as he grew up, she fled. As soon as he grew up, she dropped all the riches, all the position, all the status, all the power. She didn't seek to be an abbess, a person of high standing in the church. And this was the old Anglo-Saxon church. You know, these monasteries were not like we think of monasteries later, these huge grand buildings with gorgeous carving on them. These were often made out of wattle and daub and mud and timber. You know, they were sometimes made out of a substance called cob, which is a combination of straw, horse manure and mud. And then you plaster over and whitewash it, and then you thatch it. So these were basic living. This was poverty. And And you were expected to work as well as a monk or a nun, no matter what your background was. But Sexburger fled. She couldn't get away quick enough. The comforts of the palace were dust and ashes to her. She's described rather fabulously by the Book of Ely, as it's called, because she went to Ely ultimately, to the monastery there. Now, Ely was an island in the middle of the fens, and it's called Ely because of the astonishing amount of eels that you found around it. So it kind of, yeah, Ely, eels, yes. Well, her sister had set up a monastery, and she fled there, and she became an ordinary nun. But she's described as being, and I'm going to find this because I like this, a pretiosa virago. So when her life came to be written later on, her life as a saint because she was venerated, she was described as a pretiosa virago, and that means a precious lady warrior. I like that. A precious lady warrior. I think I'm going to call my sister that next time. Say, Natalie, you're a pretiosa virago. I suspect a fight will ensue. Yeah. Now, when Ethelthryth, which was her sister, died, she unfortunately had to take the role of abbess. So she did end up as abbess all the same. But the reason I'm telling you this story about Sexburger is that Sexburger saw exactly the same thing that was seen in 19th century circles of the Church of England. The same thing I saw when I was younger. The same thing which is available to each and every one of you. The same thing which Troy Perry saw. In fact, the only thing that has the power to kick us out of the life into which we would sink is the vision glorious. And the vision glorious is a shaft of sunlight that enters the dungeon and shows us that we are in a dungeon. It is a shaft of light that illuminates our poverty, that we believe ourselves to be wealthy, we believe ourselves to be well off, and then this shaft of light comes and we see we are poverty-stricken and destitute, but it doesn't matter because we are illuminated by the light of God, and all things are achievable in the light of that grace.
Amen.
All victory is contained in the light of that grace. We would abandon everything as Sexburger abandoned her kingdom, and as others before them abandoned all they had. As Christ called upon the fishermen on the banks of the Sea of Galilee to drop everything and follow him, we are so called. Yes. We are so called. We're not different just because we're modern. They thought they were modern too. Everyone thinks they're modern. Sexburger didn't say, oh, well, I'm an antiquated Anglo-Saxon queen, so what I think isn't going to apply to anyone else. No, she thought she was at the cutting edge of modernity. You know? We are modern because we have a trench outside the monastery. You can poop in the trench. That's modern, that is. In my young day, it was just out of the window. We're the same stuff. We are the same people of those great saints. You know, saints are only ever the top skimmings off of a huge congregation that has gone before, all of which were holy men and women. The saints are just the ones they happen to get noticed long enough. But they're not the only ones. And it's important to say that because saints, you are saints. And therefore you must be open to the vision glory. Actually, we can pass that on now. I've missed the point where it was important, but there you go. Now, the vision glorious that struck Sexburger and her family and caused them to abandon the grandeur and comfort of their life had repercussions. They built their monastery, which was originally a humble affair built out of timber and probably wattle and daub mud, on this little island called Ely, surrounded by swamps as far as the eye could see. That now stands on the site of their monastery. Ely Cathedral is one of the most magnificent magnificent and extraordinary buildings in Christendom, and a single set of choices to go into the wilderness and to seek the vision glorious, to promise yourself to place and to people. This is the important thing. We are not spiritual consumers. We are people who make a covenant with one another. A church is a people who make covenant with one another. We also make covenant to place. And a monk or a nun makes a covenant to their place. And Ely was the place they made covenant. They said, I will not run away. No matter how difficult you are, I will not run away from you. No matter how much I hate you at the moment, I am not going to defame you to get me off the hook, because I'm still going to have to be living with you in 10 years' time. It's like a marriage. It's like a marriage. You have to be careful what you say, because you're still going to be with that person in years to come, and it can come back and haunt you, especially if your partner has a photographic memory. I'm not saying anything. So that vision glorious touches the rich and the poor alike. We have the desert fathers and mothers, some of whom were nobly born, some of whom were very, very humbly born, but each of them became towering symbols of faith. They went away into the desert, and they fled into the desert not to get away from people, but to get away from society, to get away from the possibility of wealth, the possibility of ease, the possibility of people telling them how fabulous they were. Because they knew that being irritated with their neighbor all the time was only going to test their soul. But being lavished with money and being lavished with approbation and being told how wonderful a spiritual teacher they were could damn them. And I use that word because I don't know about you, but I have at times experienced what I felt as damnation. I know that I felt things slipping away, that core of me that was in love with God was in danger of being swallowed up by everything else. Until the vision glorious came, and I experienced that ray of light that illuminated the room that I'd been in, which I thought was so grand. And it turned out